While the left seems pretty solid that a variety of genders exist,
My pronouns are USA.
the right's views are pretty clear.
What do you have to say to the trans students on this campus who feel actively victimized by your presence here?
Life's tough. Get a helmet, man. I'm too pregnant for this. Next question.
But who is right? Welcome to our channel. Today, we're diving deep into the rise of gender debates over the last 10 years. We'll explore the top 10 heated moments in different gender debates and give you a non-partial commentary on the same. Number 10, a 12-year-old boy was pulled out of class by his teacher. His crime? He wore a t-shirt that read, "Only two genders." The teacher spoke to him and told him that his t-shirt was making some groups in the school feel unsafe and uncomfortable. He then had to face the school disciplinary board and explain his actions. The boy went on to face the board, prepared a speech, and asked if his rights were less important than the protected group's feelings. He said that just like they were entitled to their beliefs, so was he. Just as he didn't complain when he saw pride flags and diversity posters hung throughout the school, they didn't have the right to suppress his right to expression. He did not apologize for his actions.
I didn't go to school that day to hurt feelings or cause trouble. I have learned a lot from this experience. I learned that a lot of other students share my view. I learned that adults don't always do the right thing or make the right decisions. I know that I have a right to wear a shirt with those 5 words. Even at 12 years old, I have my own political opinions, and I have a right to express those opinions. Even at school, this right is called the First Amendment to the Constitution.
Was he bold and courageous for standing up for what he believed? Or was he ignorant, hurtful, and insensitive, needing better education from his parents and teachers? The answer is up for debate, but it does make you wonder if you should or should not let kids participate in this conversation. Number 9. Next one is a famous debate where one of the people on the panel identifies both non-binary and trans.
So I identify as non-binary and trans at the same time. I believe non-binary is under the trans umbrella. I'm neither, I am both, I am beyond.
To this, a social activist, who many of you would know as Blair White, a transgender woman herself, didn't seem happy nor convinced with this statement. Blair White says that you cannot be trans and non-binary at the same time, as being transsexual is a medical condition, while non-binary is more of a political identity. They do not fall under the same umbrella.
Completely reject how non-binary people specifically have injected themselves into the trans label. I am a transsexual. There's a medical basis for that. There's a scientific basis for that. And for non-binary, it's really not the case. I think that non-binary is more of a political term than anything else.
While Blair does seem to have a point, the major problem is that Blair herself seems to be far more right-leaning when it comes to political ideologies. And there have been several instances where she has mentioned that being transgender means that you do have a mental illness.
At some point you described dysphoria as like a mental illness. So would you consider yourself then mentally ill because you are transgender?
Sure. While what Blair believes is true or not is something that we can talk about in a whole nother video, it does seem like an important revelation that needs to be made to make a fair judgment on who is right or wrong in such instances. And as for the debate between being trans and non-binary, the two do not reach a conclusion. Number 7. Up next is probably one of the most iconic debates in the history of television. Two famous TV personalities, Zoe Tur, a trans female news reporter, and Ben Shapiro, a lawyer and conservative political activist, are seen discussing trans issues. Shapiro cheekily states that if you are born male, you are male. Shapiro even claimed that transgenders are delusional, which might have been a rather harsh statement to make even to get your point across.
So it begins.
Being brave is being yourself, and being transgender is about the bravest thing you can do. Did she deserve the award? Yes.
Why are we mainstreaming delusion?
It's not delusion.
Why would you call it delusion?
Because Bruce Caitlyn Jenner, I'll call him Caitlyn Jenner.
No,
because
it's
that's
her. You're not being polite to the pronoun.
Because
disrespectful.
Okay, forget about the disrespect. Facts don't care about your feelings. It turns out that every chromosome, every cell in Caitlyn Jenner's body is male with the exception of some of his sperm cells. It turns out that his brain structure is male.
Wait, I need to...
He repeats that a man is a man and a woman is a woman a couple of times, and even calls Zoe Tur sir, which clearly crosses a line. This infuriates Tur, and eventually leads to her threatening to assault him on live TV if he doesn't shut up.
You cut that out now, or you'll go home in an ambulance.
Yeah, that seems mildly inappropriate for a political discussion.
Many viewers of the channel, especially followers of Shapiro, came out in support of Shapiro, saying that her threat was inappropriate and unprofessional on live national television. Is it acceptable to make such statements on TV? I do not think so. But was Ben slightly harsh and insensitive as well? 100%. But I've got to give it to Ben for this savage reply.
I mean, it did lead to a physical assault. I mean, Zoe reached over, grabbed me by the back of the neck, and said, if you don't cut that out, I'll send you home in an ambulance. To which I have to say, my first mental response was, that doesn't even make sense. You don't go home in an ambulance.
Well, that one's on you, Zoe. Number 6. Steven Crowder, a popular YouTuber, firmly believes there are only two genders, male and female. Challenging people to change their minds, he set up a public space where he engaged in conversations about the gender spectrum. His chosen spot? A busy college campus where he talked to students, professors, and anyone willing to join the discussion. Here are a few clips of how it went.
Male and female is different than being a man or a woman.
Okay.
And the fact that we have, as a society, created man and the male gender roles, and just as women gender roles, just as we would anything else, the same way that we would say that, I don't know, that music is good, or that we have created it to place people into roles. And so I'm saying that if you were male or female, if you identified more as a man and the gender roles that go with being a man, that you have that.
So you're saying that sex and gender are very different.
Yes.
Two genders, we often confuse the idea of gender and sex.
Sure.
Sex is a generalization of XY chromosomes, so we assume that, or XY, XX, combination of chromosomes. So we assume that male and female comes from your chromosomes, right? But that's really just the idea that there's only two possibilities of sex, right? So even within sex itself, you can be born intersex, which means that you're born with sexual characteristics of both what we would consider male and female. And then you have gender, and gender is more about a mental state based off of societal norms. So within our Western society, we often discuss gender as being binary, meaning that there's two options.
Sure.
So boy, girl, man, woman. However, in other societies, non-Western societies, there are more than two options.
Okay, can I ask you a couple of questions there to unpack? Appreciate you taking the time, by the way. So what was your name?
Madison.
Madison. So let's go to the sex concept before gender, I think. Have you here? I'm open to having my mind changed.
Same, buddy. So I'll just break this down for you. Basically, so I think what you guys were getting at in your last exchange, basically you guys are trying to establish like sex and gender, which technically are different, and sex usually is boiled down to more of reproductive potentials, and gender is like a lifestyle and everything like that.
More societal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's seen engaging with a variety of people on whether there are more than two genders, what those genders might be, how long they've been recognized, and whether the gender spectrum is being treated as a joke or an agenda now, where anyone can simply decide their gender. The students presented their opinions well, but Steven's mind remained unchanged. They had respectful and casual conversations about it, and then it was time for him to wrap up. It's quite an interesting video, which really made me wonder if more people are still somewhere in the middle about this. Number 5. At a university in Toronto, students have approached the administration to ask professors and staff to refer to non-binary students by their preferred pronouns. Some students feel that she and he pronouns don't fit them and wish to encourage the use of preferred pronouns on campus. If you've been living under a rock, meet Jordan Peterson, a psychology professor. However, trouble began when Jordan refused to use the preferred pronouns of the students. He defends himself by stating that it's his political opinion, which he is entitled to. Things have become heated at the university. Students have started protests, and both students and some professors are divided into two groups, supporters and opposers of Professor Peterson. This issue has even sparked debates on news channels in the city. One professor, Professor A.W. Pete, who sides with the opposers and protests against Peterson, was invited to a news channel to debate him. Professor Pete says that Peterson's stance is harmful to the identity of many students in the trans and non-binary community.
Professor Peterson, let's begin with you. Why are you against the use of alternate pronouns?
I'm against the use of legislation to determine what words that myself and other people are required to utter
But would you use alternate pronouns if a student asked you to?
I think I've made my position on that clear already.
Well, perhaps not to our audience at home who are just being introduced to this. Would you use alternate pronouns? And why not?
Because I don't believe that other people have the right to determine what language I use, especially when it's backed by punitive legislation.
What do you say to those types of criticisms, including the one that you just heard from Professor Peterson?
Well, I'd like to encourage people struggling with this to be kind as their first impulse. You know, we call somebody what they want to be called in our society. For instance, I don't call somebody Julie if they prefer to be called Jordan. That's just basic human courtesy. Here's a great little tip for people who are despairing at the possibility of remembering all those pronouns. What I do is just program in the pronoun next to the person's name in my smartphone. So whenever I'm out and about and I've forgotten whether one of my trans friends uses ze or zer or they or them or something else, I just look it up and it's really super easy. One thing I'd like you to really look at in regard to this controversy is to watch out for who's getting centered in a discussion. Political correctness is code that powerful people use when they're annoyed that they're actually not the center of attention in any given discussion.
The debate ends with Peterson stating that allowing people to choose their own pronouns, like zir, z, and higher, sets a dangerous precedent. Professor Pete counters by saying that using the correct pronouns for someone doesn't cause any harm, but makes life easier for the other person. Whose side are you on? Do you find it easy to remember pronouns? Let me know in the comments down below. Number 4. There have been ongoing debates about gender among politicians, professors, students, and the general public. But the same continued in the Joe Rogan podcast, where the different genders debate was put through the theories of postmodernism.
Definition, tell me how it's only bad. Why is it only bad to define men as men and women as women?
Because, well, if you say it's about making the biological claim, the biological connection there.
Well, making a definition, like saying a guy who is born a guy who gravitates towards male activities, likes females, all those things, by saying that that's a man, that this is a born man, and you're saying no one is.
So if you're saying if those characteristics are naturally determined, then all of us guys who don't do those things are unnatural.
Thaddeus Russell talks about how gender constructs and gender stereotypes are outdated. And by this, he doesn't mean the 2020s, he means the 1960s. He says that this was when the period of postmodernism began, which solved the confusion surrounding gender dysphoria. Russell argues that gender is purely a social construct and has no relation to biology. With the beginning of postmodernism, we are now free individuals who can do as we please, including choosing our own pronouns. This freedom allows us to break away from traditional gender roles and live as our real identities.
But the central argument that was made by Foucault and postmodernists was that none of these things are biologically determined, that there is no natural essence to anything, that everything is a social construct. Which means that we now are free to choose our own destiny as individuals, right? Prior to that, prior to the 1960s and 70s, it was the dominant belief that if you were born a woman, you were going to be a wife and a mother. And if you weren't, you were doing something unnatural, right? That if you were black, you could never be the head of a business or the president, right? You could never do math, whatever. If you were white, you know, you should do all those things, right? Everybody's destiny was determined at birth. And everyone believed that. Most people believed that.
Okay.
So postmodernists came along and said, guess what? You know what we found looking at history? We found just what I said. I just gave you the whole postmodern argument right there. We looked at history and we saw, first of all, that all these categories have changed over time, which tells us that they're just inventions. They're just inventions that get reinvented all the time, okay? And second of all, they have served the purposes of ruling elites because they get to put people in their boxes and control them more easily, right? Oh, those people over there, those are black, therefore they should be our slaves. So it's okay for us to have them as slaves. Those women over there, we don't want them, you know, working for NASA, so we will have a rule against women working for NASA, whatever it is, right? So postmodernists said, none of this is biological, none of this is inevitable. You are now free to do what you want as an individual. It was a liberating moment. It has become the dominant way of thinking in academia. And I have to say, in my view, it is the supreme achievement of academics ever.
In response, the host of the show, Joe Rogan, says that he believes people born as men are men and people born as women are women. He thinks the idea of a gender spectrum is silly. Joe Rogan's answer doesn't let one further debate on the topic because Russell does indeed bring up some valid points. The debate ends without reaching a conclusion. Let's just say they both agree to disagree. However, they do find one thing to agree on. Internet bots and trolls on social media that comment nasty things under their posts are annoying. Number 4. For this one, we have another extremely infamous interview where Matt Walsh challenges a trans activist to define the word woman. A rather basic question. However, the activist responds that they cannot define it because it is up to each person's own definition. To each their own, or something like that. Matt Walsh sees this as a failure of his argument, saying that if he can't even define the terms he's discussing, his argument loses all credibility.
Well, this is one of the problems with this left-wing gender ideology, is that no one who espouses it can even tell you what these words mean. Like, what is a woman?
Well,
can you tell me what a woman is?
No, I can't. Because it's not for me to say. Womanhood looks different for everybody.
What do you define a woman as?
An adult human female.
And what does a female mean?
Well,
how
that's
do you define a female?
someone with female reproductive organs.
Okay.
Someone who's, here's the thing, when you're female, it goes right down to your bones, your DNA. So that's why if someone dies, we could dig up their bones 100 years from now. We have no idea what they believed in their head, but we can tell what sex they were because it's ingrained in every fiber of their being.
On one side, not being able to define something does take away from the credibility of your ideology. But on the other hand, isn't it extremely hard to define a lot of things? For instance, love. What exactly does it mean? It's hard to define, and we all have our own versions of it. Though a woman and love are two completely different things, it is something that makes you wonder. However, the question of what exactly a woman is something I'm still curious to find out. Can we define it? And if yes, what is your version of the same? Let me know how in the comments down below because I'm actually curious about the answers. Number 3. In a debate on the Dr. Phil show, the topic of discussion is whether men can also menstruate. Viewers are surprised that a man who is just a 5th grade teacher can silence these gender rights activists who are arguing about trans men's and trans women's rights. The man repeatedly insists that people cannot change genders just because they want to. They can pretend to be someone else, and that's fine. But he will not be forced to believe that or call someone by pronouns other than the ones assigned at birth.
Transgender boys who might not have their own money to go buy tampons, if they're provided free in the bathroom, it's a huge plus.
Men do not menstruate. Only women menstruate. Now, you can call yourself whatever you want.
Cis men don't menstruate, but trans men do menstruate.
No,
Same
they
as
don't.
non-binary people.
Only women.
Menstruating is not exclusive
Yes,
to
it
cis
is.
women. No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
So explain to me as to why my body menstruated at
If
some
your
point
chromosomes are XX and you're young, you menstruate. If you're XY, you don't.
Correct, but what about trans men and non-binary?
They're
We're
not
excluding
men.
a whole group of people
They're women
that
dressed
menstruate.
as men. You are not a man. You can pretend to be a man, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. Live your life and tell me what a man is.
What are your thoughts on this issue? Should personal beliefs influence how we respect others' identities, or is the 5th grade teacher wrong? Number 2. During the Republican primaries, Vivek Ramaswamy is seen sharing his opinion that transgenderism is a mental disorder. He advocates strongly against gender mutilation and chemical castration, especially in children under 18. Ramaswamy argues that children should be protected from these practices and supports banning such treatments for minors until they reach maturity. The audience is heard clapping for him.
North Star here is transgenderism is a mental health disorder. We don't let you smoke a cigarette by the age of 18. We don't let you have an addictive drink of alcohol by the age of 21. And I just challenge Ron DeSantis to go one step further and support what I think is clearly within the authority to do using federal funds just like Reagan did in '84 for the Highway Act that said the minimum drinking age needs to be 21. We can do the same thing when it comes to banning genital mutilation or chemical castration.
Okay.
I know Ron's been unclear about that on the
Ambassador
federal
Haley.
level. I'm crystal clear. That's where I stand.
Got it.
That's a mental health disorder. That's where we
it.
need to be at.
Though I'm 100% on his side about these arguments, I wonder why these same activists have nothing to say about cosmetic procedures in children, and even anything about child actors. Why don't they believe it's important to voice their own opinion on such issues? Because it doesn't serve their political agenda? Number 1. In a news channel debate, Tommy Lowe argues that men identifying as women are not the everyday next-door LGBT activists we expect them to be. This is part of a larger agenda by the LGBT community to erase women from all areas of life. She claims they are trying to take advantage of women and the little power they have in the real world. Lowe refers to this as the rainbow mafia. Is she being delusional and conspiratorial? Or is there some truth to her statement? Let's watch the rest of the video to see why she says this and what her arguments are.
Be able to define what a woman is. This is all a farce. They are seeking to erase women, and this is the radical rainbow mafia, as I call it. This is not your average LGBT activist. This is the rainbow mafia section of that radical LGBTQ movement that has made women less than, and then has elevated all of this transgenderism and all of this pick your gender, identify as potato. They have hijacked the women's rights movement, the feminist movement, and actual feminists should be really pissed off about it.
Later, in another conversation with a trans rights activist, Piers Morgan makes a controversial statement. He jokingly asks if he could identify as a black lesbian woman if he wished to. The activist in return called it an absurd and disrespectful remark.
So why can't I identify? Okay, why can't I identify as a black lesbian?
Well, firstly, I mean, it was.
I'm serious. I'm serious. If I can identify as anything without any need to prove I'm actually what that is, why can't I, on International Women's Day, say I'm Piers Morgan, I'm a black lesbian?
I think taking it to a kind of absurd.
I would love to know your thoughts on all of this in the comments down below. Please subscribe to the channel for more disputes. We will see you very soon in another video where we will both respectfully agree as well as disagree. Because guess what? We all can.